find that a really hard act to follow. Donna, that was absolutely wonderful how you dropped out on the piano and let us do a cappella on the last verse. It just really brought that nearer to Jesus home. And I'm here to tell you the most important thing as I stand up here and speak. I want y'all to understand, and y'all hear me this when I'm ever preaching and I'm ever teaching Sabbath school class, about how much God is love. God is love. And if I don't get that point through and get you to understand, get just a little bit closer to Jesus because of the time we spend together, I don't need to be here. Jesus is the reason. Jake, thank you so very much for reading the Sabbath school Bible verse for me this morning. Jake's my buddy. I've been thinking about that, and as you were reading that text up here, my mind went back to when I was a young fella at the church up the way before we bought this property and built a church here. On a dare, a fellow named Fred Parkhurst came up to me. I was hanging out with the teenage boys. I don't think I was quite yet a teenager. And Miles Kuhn was getting ready to do our service for us that morning, and Fred said, "Pastor Kuhn doesn't have anybody to help him this morning, and you're too chicken to go up there and offer to help. You got feathers on your legs, Don." I don't know. Somebody told Tom and I years ago, a little bit later after that we were like tough pine knots, and that was more than it took. And so I went up to Miles Kuhn, Pastor Kuhn, and I said, "Is there anything I can help you with the service today?" And he smiled ear to ear and put me to work, and I've been put to work ever since. Jake, I wasn't much older than you when that happened, and that's what I'm thinking about, and I'm wanting to put you to work here in the church too. And I've got several other young people. Haley, where are you? Now, I know I told you yesterday that I was going to preach to you, but I'm sorry. I love you dearly, young lady, but there's too many young people here and others here that I can only preach to one, so I've got to spread my love out to everybody, okay? You understand? Nothing personal. It's just I've got a great big heart, and I can't narrow it down to just one person. I want to go back in and read our Bible text from this morning again, but I'm going to read it from the Clear Standard Version and add a couple of texts to it, Jake, if that's okay. Dear friends, let us love one another because love is from God. And this is not the text I asked you to read, by the way. I'm adding a little bit to it. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God because what? God is love. That's 1 John 4, 7, and 8, and I'm reading it from the Clear Standard Bible. And I'm going to read the one from Proverbs that I had Jake read, plus a couple of more texts here too, and it's from the Clear Standard Version, Proverbs chapter 6. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, or slacker is what it's called him. Are y'all slackers? I hope not. Observe its ways and become wise. Without leader, administrator, or ruler, it prepares its provisions in summer. It gathers its food during harvest. Let me see if I can make this work now. And I've got it on. It's not working. I did a beautiful PowerPoint, so Marshall or somebody get up there and see if y'all can get that going for me. But while I tell a little story about my brother Tom and I. See, God is organized, and that's part of what I'm on. Oh, there we go. The ant's on now. Y'all got it. So there we have it. But I'm going to tell you this story anyway because I got started on it. God is really, really organized, and that's part of what I want to point out to you. He has a plan, and He puts everything in place in its proper form, in its proper way, so that everything works. And we're going to talk about the ant just a little bit, but I want to give you an example about haphazard and how that I just have to praise God when I think of this story that God blessed Tom and I anyway. He wanted to keep us alive for a little bit longer, I think, for something we did. As I said, we were like pine knots. David Palmer told us that. And my dad encouraged us to be creative and to work and do things around the farm. I don't think he quite had in mind what we did with this, but for some reason he bought some scraps and brought them home, and it was part of an old go-kart cart, but it wasn't much more than a plate of steel that had wheels attached to it and some kind of a little steering mechanism up there on top, and no motor. Tom and I saw this, and our minds went crazy. I think I was between 11 and 12 years old, Jimmy, when this happened. And what can we do? Because we want gasoline power to take us places so that we can do a few things. And we had an old tiller that was my grandfather's that was on the farm that had a motor on it. And it had to be a shaft that was horizontal instead of vertical, because, you know, your lawnmowers have the vertical shaft. So we went out there and we took the old tiller apart after we made sure that we could get the motor running. And it had a fan belt on, you know, a belt on that tiller. And the way it was set up, it had that thing when you squeezed the handles on it, it tightened up the belt so that the tines would work and whatever. But Tom and I, in our infinite wisdom at age 11, 12, and maybe whatever we were, we mounted this on the back, and it wouldn't go back far enough, so we had to get a board, and we drilled some holes and found some bolts and got it to where it tightened up all the way, and it was tight. And the throttle thing, we found a couple of more places where we could put a little thing here. We didn't have a pedal for the throttle. We just had it, you know, where you bring it open, the further you pull back on the thing, the faster it would go. Take it back the other way, it would slow down. But what we didn't think about is when you start this thing and we put the belt tight, that it takes off and won't stop. So here I am on this thing. Tom started it because I'm smaller than he was. And off we go. And I'm screaming, it's going, and I'm having a blast. But how do I stop? You know, and I couldn't get off of it. And so the next thing you know, here's a ditch, and I'm in it. Thank goodness the wheels kept spinning. Well, we added to that. We figured out a way to put a kill switch thing where you could flip it, you know, so one would have to run behind the other. And when it was time to stop, you'd reach up there and hit that thing, you know, and it would flip up there, and it would ground out the spark plug, and we would stop. Then we got smarter, because by that time Daddy came home, and he saw what we were doing, and he said, boys, this isn't going to work. Y'all need a slip clutch. I don't know where he found the slip clutch. I can't remember that. But see, a slip clutch works, it was on part of a chainsaw somewhere, I guess, and it fit the shaft. A slip clutch works is when the speed of the engine speeds up, it engages, and so then and when you slowed it back down, it would disengage, and so you could stop. But we still didn't have any brakes on the thing. Well, the resistance of this is we learned how to manage it quite well, and we could do all kinds of fun, and we were having a blast. We wore a circle out in our backyard. And my aunt and uncle came over one day, and my Aunt Ree, those of you that know my dear sweet Aunt Ree, Mildred, she saw what we were doing, and she said, that looks like fun. I'm like, I'll take a ride if y'all want me to. So us being generous little boys, we let my Aunt Ree get on this thing and try it. Can y'all hear how the disorganization is going? We didn't have a real plan. I can assure you, our plan was not very good. So here it is. We put my aunt on there, and we had a homemade seat that we'd bolted on the thing by that time, rather than, I don't know what we started before we found the old seat. It was off of an old rake or something out there in the field, an old horse-drawn rake that we'd taken the seat off of and put it on this thing. And we had my Aunt Ree on it, and she was going around in a circle, and everything was fine until she leaned back a little bit and pulled on the steering wheel. What we didn't tell her is we didn't have a Carter key to put in, and so the steering wheel came off, and she couldn't drive it. And so away she went, and us chasing behind her, and she was panicking, holding the steering wheel up in the air. I think I finally got up to it and somehow hit the kill switch and brought it down to where it would die. Now that's an example of disorganized action, which is in direct opposition to the way Jesus Christ works with us and wants us to know that He's in charge no matter what, and He has a plan. Let me see if I can make this thing go to the next slide. Oh, what did I do wrong? Oh, you're going to go to the next slide for me. Okay, flip to my next slide. I've read the text already while you were getting that going on. So click on to the next slide for me too. So we're going to talk now about organization and God and a little bit different mindset. So you bring back to recognize Tom and I were nowhere near God in our organizational skills. But I tell you that to recognize if you go with the evolution theory that scientists have come to teach in our schools, and this is what I'm really pointing out. We have several children here. Hold up your hands if you go to public school. We have several of our children here that are public school students, and they teach disorganized evolutionary theory where that over the years, millimeter at a time, the earth built up and the fossils fell into the ground and whatever, and it all gets covered up over billions and whatever of years, and you name it. And that's a disorganized theory, right? About as intelligent as mine and my brother's go-kart story. So what I want you to do is we're going to the ant now, and I'm going to tell you about this little ant here. Those of you that travel find out about things. And so we were in Costa Rica, and we were on one of those eco-tour type things for a day. And the guy stopped us in the middle, and he pointed down on the ground, and he showed us what's called a carpenter ant. Any of y'all familiar with carpenter ants? A few of you have read about it. That's good. They're one of the most amazing ant species on the face of the earth. But this goes to show in my mind the magnitude and the depth of organization that God has in His plan of creation and for us. These little ants, you think that they're taking a piece of leaf back to their little den where they live, where their anthill is, so that they would have food to eat, right? Is that your first thought that that's what they're doing? Uh-huh. That makes perfect sense. But no, that's not what this ant does. This ant has built its hole down in the ground in an area where that they've gone down deep enough that there's moisture there that's at a perfect level of humidity for what they're wanting to do, and the temperature is constant. These ants take this piece of leaf down into their little burrowed hole in the ground, and they have mold there that grows. And as this mold grows that they take care of and propagate, that is their food source. They eat the mold. This colony is so organized. No, I'm not talking to you right now. This colony is so organized that they have worker bee ants that go and get the leaves and bring them back. They have housekeepers that keep their little area clean, bring out their waste products. They carry them away from their ant hill so that it's at another location away from their thing. They have morticians so that when an ant passes his life cycle and his lifetime he dies, they have another group of ants that carry the dead ants out to keep their area clean and taken care of. They have earth movers, which are diggers that take the soil out to enlarge their nest down underground so that it continued to propagate and grow. They have guards. If you get too close to this ant hill, these guards will come after you, and they have stingers and they will bite you and attack you. They have a queen that lays eggs so that they can continue their nest, and when the queen wears out, they figure out a way. I don't know quite how they did it. It's very complex, but they have another queen that's born so that they can continue their nest. And then they also have nursery workers which take care of the young until they're old enough to be assigned their particular duty and task for the colony. Do y'all realize how many steps and how complex it is for a little bitty ant like this to survive? Do you think God, in His infinite wisdom, is organized beyond what you and I can imagine? Did this just happen? I don't think so. That's beyond, when you do math, I don't know, I'm not a statistician, but I can't imagine the magnitude of the math number you'd have to put behind this for us to say that this all just happened at the right time and at the right place. Let's flip on to the next slide, if you would. I go on to what I call the Bible theory. And Marshall gave me a book, and Rosemary told me to read it quick because I could, but I'm sorry, Rosemary. I'm a slow reader. I take books in. It's on hermeneutics, and I'm in the chapter that I just finished reading. It says about people that have their PhD, and it gave a good dissertation on this, on why. It said the problem is with most dissertations and the most people that are considered educated is perhaps they're asking the wrong questions. My daughter's actually working on her PhD right now, and so I'm listening to the process that she's going through. And you have a mentor, some different professors and things, whatever. And as you go through the process, they selectively guide you and they direct you into focusing more and more on your particular topic and your particular thing of interest. And to get the grade and to provide things and move forward, you pretty well have to somewhat listen to and shape your thoughts into the way that your mentor wants you to shape your thoughts. So we've got a lot of people out there with a lot of letters behind their names that are considered very educated. And I'm not saying this to slam anybody that's got a PhD or a master's degree or a bachelor's or any other degree that you might have. But if you don't ask the right question for your thought process, will you get the right results in the end? So the question was brought up in science just recently, and it's in this book, the hermeneutics books that I've read, and I just pick on particular topics that grab my interest, and I dig a little deeper on it when I'm not one that can just read a book, Rosemary, I'm sorry. Especially one that's considered an educated book. I have to think, analyze, dig in it a little bit, figure out if I like what I'm reading or not, or whether it makes sense or not. I call them questions. And it's not because I'm saying somebody's wrong. I sometimes like to validate in my own mind, or what you're telling me right or wrong? And see, as Christians, as we read the Bible, that's our job. Don't take anybody's word for it. Don't take my word for what I'm saying up here today. Pull out the Bible and read it. See if it makes sense. But see, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And back to the question was, are they asking the right questions? And the question came up, and we'll get to this a little bit more detailed in a minute. See, when you have all these fossils in the ground and stuff that they claim took millions and millions of years to be buried and covered up and to be where they claim that they are, with the various layers of soil around them, the question come up, why isn't, and we live on a farm, Tom, we've had a few cows die on the farm, there's been a few deer die on the farm, and as we go out there in the pasture and we roam around and we find their bones, they deteriorate. I don't see anything in the process of becoming a fossil. So if nothing that dies today is in the process of fossilizing and getting into whatever you call it that science has, is the question that they're asking correct? Does that make sense? So the question is that your philosophers, everybody's been taught that with all these letters behind their name, that evolution is the way things are. And as you study the science and you study sciences, they keep pulling out carbon-dated methods and this method and that method, and they start telling you why it's all this millions of years old and whatever. But nothing today is fossilizing based on something that dies and it decomposes. It disappears. It's gone, Jimmy. So that's a different question. Does that make scientists, should they start thinking, maybe there's something wrong with our analysis of the data that we've created? And my alternative view comes from the Bible. I love the Bible. I hope y'all do too. Y'all are here anyway, so I assume that means you're here because you love the Bible too. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's Genesis 1:1. And on day 1, He separated the light. Day 2 separated the water from the air. Day 3, vegetation occurred. Day 4, the sun and moon. Now wait a minute, let's pause here a minute. I'm going to put the question to it on the millions of year theory right now. And this is what I want our children in the public schools to hear. I did an experiment with some of my Pathfinders years ago. See now, If I go out into the pasture and I lay down a board or a piece of plywood on the grass, what happens to the grass underneath the plywood? It dies. Now, if I take the board back off of the grass and light starts hitting it again, it'll start growing again, won't it? What is the byproduct of photosynthesis that lets trees, grass, and plants grow? What does it do? It takes in a little product called what? Carbon dioxide. And as it does its thing, it puts out a little product called oxygen. Now, if plants had came first and been here for 1 million years or so before anything else would have come along, would the plants have been able to survive? No, because they would have used up all the carbon dioxide, putting out all the oxygen that's there, and they would have died because plants have to have carbon dioxide to survive. Plants also have to have sunlight to survive. Plants also have to have a particular temperature range to survive. Does that make sense, David? Okay, so there we have it. All at once, plants are made on what day did I say? Third day. Fourth day, the sun and moon. Fifth day, what shows up? All the birds that fly and the fish in the sea and a lot of other things like that show up. Now, what do all of these animals use? They breathe in what? Oxygen. And put out what? Carbon dioxide. What do birds also do? They eat seeds. And they move seeds around. And the insects do what's called pollination for all the little plants. Now, if all of these birds and things had developed before the plants got here, I think they would have starved to death, wouldn't they? See what I'm saying by asking the right questions? Just because it's established fact by a particular group of scientists, and they want to stand up and shout it from the mountaintop that this is the way it is, don't question us. Does it make sense is the question that you need to ask. When you put some basic ideas around it and wrap it up in a bow, it does not make sense. But see, what you have happening here, if you go with the millions and billions of years of evolutionary theory, you destroy the weekly cycle which God put in place in the Garden of Eden. Next, day 6, what did He create? He created all the mammals and all the beasts that walk on the earth and stuff like that. And they eat the grass, right? And they live in the trees. All kinds of things happen. It's nature's balance. And on day 6, also God created man. And man got to name all this stuff. But you know what happened shortly after that? And it was the most horrible thing ever. And this is where I want to get back to God is love. Adam and Eve were deceived by Satan. And they made a mistake. Can we flip to the next slide? And they made a horrible mistake. And the first thing that God did that day, did God wait very long before He came back to see Adam and Eve? No. That afternoon, God came back to the earth and He said, Adam, Eve, where are you? Where are you? What'd they do? They had hid. Why? Because they were ashamed and they were sorry. They knew they'd made a mistake. So God didn't leave them alone and walk off and throw them out the back door, did He? See, that's what we do sometimes when people make mistakes. We try to throw them out the back door. But I'm here to tell you, young people, Jesus loves you, and He knows that you're going to make a mistake or two along the way. And He had a plan before this earth was built to deal with the sin issue. And He came down that day from heaven and spent that evening with Adam and Eve and explained to them the plan of salvation and redemption and reconciliation between Him and God, between man and God. And what was the first thing that Jesus did with Adam and Eve? He had them slay a lamb. And this lamb, or this blood that was shed from this lamb, is the beginning process which represents the blood of Jesus Christ, which was shed for the remission of our sins, so that we too can have hope. But I'm going to move the sermon along now. Y'all see I put up a screen now that's got different names on it. This is the genealogy of Noah. And as I went down through there, in the Bible, in Genesis chapter 7, y'all can read it later if you want to, it tells the age of each of these men when their firstborn was born. So like Adam was 130 years old when Seth was born. Seth was 105 years old when Enosh was born. Enosh was 90 when Canaan was born, on down the line to where you get down to when Noah was born. It was approximately 1,056 years, and I'm going to give or take a little bit because we don't know where in the year these men were when their children were born, so it could be a few more years added to it or whatever, something like that. And then in the year number, the 600th year of Noah, God had been fed up with the sin that had taken place because these people that lived in this wonderful earth that he had created had so converted themselves and subverted themselves away from God that he decided, I'm tired, we're going to straighten it out. So at about year 1600 or so, God sends a flood. The earth is all broken up. The floodgates of the sky was opened. The watery depths of the earth burst forth water. You know what? I don't have a video in my mind, nor can science quite explain how God covered the whole earth with water. But you know what God said he did? And it makes a whole lot of sense based on what we're going to talk about next. What happened to the whole world? Everybody and everything on it basically drowned except for Noah, his wife, their 3 children, and their wives. 8 people. I think that's the right number of fingers. Yep, 8 people survived in the ark. And afterwards, they came out of the ark and repopulated the earth. But something happened to all of that detritus that drowned it. Now, in a little book called Patriarchs and Prophets, we're told what happens. But it's common sense. Now, if all of this stuff had been left out in the air as the water receded, it would have been like our cows that died, Tom. They would have all rotted. I can only imagine the level of stench that would have been going on the earth for I don't know how long as this stuff rotted in the atmosphere. But God, in His infinite mercy, while the waters were sloshing around, sent all the trees and all the animals. They kind of settled into an area, and mud and whatever that was stirred up settled down on top of it. And we have what's called anoxic, which means without oxygen. Anoxic, big word for you kids that are in school. Y'all going to run across that at some. Have you ever heard of anoxic, David? Been across that word yet? Anoxic? You're shaking your head no. It's a word you'll get to eventually in school. Anoxic means without oxygen. What about you, Haley? Oh, she's asleep over there. You ever heard the word anoxic? No. That means without oxygen. So all of this stuff decomposes without oxygen that's covered up with mud and muck. Next slide, please. And we get this stuff, it decomposes. I used to have a piece of coal from Kentucky that one of our pastors brought me when I was pathfinding, and I've lost it. But when you pick up a piece of coal, and if any of you ever get a chance to get a piece of coal, and I'm sure some of you can somewhere, when you look at a piece of coal closely, you'll notice branches in there, pieces of leaves, all kinds of little wood pieces and stuff like that. You're smiling. You've seen coal. You know what I'm talking about. It's compressed in there. It's decomposed, and we take that coal now, and we can burn it, and we make electricity with it at our coal-fired plants. When I was a kid, people bought tons of coal, and they brought it to their house, and we used coal to heat our houses. Now, they've said that's a little bit too nasty, because I can remember going to Nashville when the sky was gray in the winter time where everybody had their coal fireplaces burning the coal, and they've gotten rid of that. You know, we use electricity and other natural gas and stuff. But when we were in California, and I laugh because I took my kids to this museum. See that right there? Can you see that there? It's a fenced-off area in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. And just what do you think that is, that puddle that's there in the middle? That's tar. Some of you have heard about the La Brea tar pit out there in the middle of downtown Los Angeles. Flip to the next screen for me. So anyway, what would happen, and and I explained it to my children as we were going through there, that what science says is different than what I think reality is. But I don't have all kinds of letters behind my name, so I don't get to write books and tell people what it is. But see, that's a mammoth. They used to roam the earth here on the United States, and that was a woolly mammoth. And what would happen is a woolly mammoth would be walking along there in the area called now downtown Los Angeles. Back then it was probably just an open field, open area, nothing really developed. And the woolly mammoth stepped into this tar, because it was covered with leaves and probably some other stuff on top of it that had blown in there, and the woolly mammoth or was running from something, and he stepped into this tar, and in an effort to get out of the tar, put the other paw, and the other paw went down in the tar, and in an effort to get away, wiggled and squirmed, started bellowing and yelling and screaming, but the next thing you know, the woolly mammoth sunk down into the tar pit. And they've been excavating this pit for quite some time. And when the woolly mammoth, if you flip to the next screen, would scream out, and then see, that's a better picture of it. And you see my children were little bitty back then when we went to this one. That's a better picture of the mammoth that got excavated from the tar pit. Flip on to the next screen. As these woolly mammoths would scream out in bloody terror at being sucked into the tar, opportunistic animals called wolves would show up thinking they had an easy meal, and so they would jump on the woolly mammoth trying to have dinner, and the next thing you know, they were caught into the tar pit as well. And so lots of wolves would start screaming. Of course, wolves, they don't care if they're hungry, whatever's there. So the next thing, they've got lots of wolf skulls and things where they got caught in the tar pit and they all sunk. And as you get into this tar, you can't get out of it, and you just sink down, 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 and the next thing you know, you're in an anoxic environment where you decompose or become preserved. And see, that's kind of a modern-day version of what happened with the flood, because suddenly you get this area where all of this stuff decomposed. It turned into oil. Of course, we pump the oil out of the ground, make gasoline and stuff. But that's where animals and the blubber and stuff from all of these animals that were covered up has turned into oil and tar. So are we asking the right questions to our people that are educated? See, the Bible tells us, there's another text in there, it says, the wisdom of man is but what? Foolishness in the sight of the Lord. Beware. I'm not saying all men are foolish. There's a lot of really intelligent, really thoughtful, really caring individuals that have lots of letters behind their names, and they're wonderful people that are really down to earth, and they're deserving of the respect they get for having the education that they have. But are we following Jesus Christ, or are we following Satan? See, that's pretty well the end of my slides. I think we're through on that. But I want to get back to the idea of organization. God is organized. He takes care of us, and He's looking out for us even before we realize that we need to be looked out for. I'll give you a little bit of small example this week. Heather, where's Heather? Heather's in Tracheo. I was upstairs on Tuesday after prayer meeting. Y'all were clearing out that room up there to get ready so they can do the development they want to do here in the building. And you had two little posters in your hand wanting to know what to do with it. And I was needing an illustration for my sermon and my plan. And there you were standing there holding those two posters. And did you notice how I slipped them out of your hand discreetly? I did. And I brought them home, and that's what I took pictures of, and that's what I showed you. So the Lord knew what I was needing and put it in my hand so that I could give you the illustrations that I wanted to today for this sermon. I probably might have found something on the internet. I'd have, gone looking or whatever. But to me, even God is in charge of little bitty things a lot of times to move us forward and to help us understand how much that He loves us. Dear friends, I'm going to read this to you again. Let us love one another, because love is from God. And everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. The one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. And also, I'm going to read the text that Jacob read for me this morning. Go to the ant, you slacker. Look at the organization of God. How He takes, plans, organizes, and makes everything work the way it needs to work for us. Remember that, people. God is love. God is love. God is love. Let us pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so very much that you care about us enough to let us know how much you love us, and that you take great efforts and strength and work in organizing everything for your honor and glory, and for us to understand how impressive your creation is. Help us to grow closer to you in all things we do. If it'll be thy will, amen.